Victorian England, 1884. The rain had been falling since dawn. Cold drops struck the windows of Ashmore Hall, a massive country estate hidden among the rolling hills of Yorkshire. Inside the mansion, the wealthy family still slept peacefully. Downstairs, however, another world had already awakened. Servants hurried through narrow corridors, carrying coal, water, linens, and breakfast trays. Among them was 18-year-old Eleanor Finch. Eleanor had worked at Ashmore Hall for nearly 3 years. Every morning she rose before 5 o'clock. Every night she collapsed into bed, long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Her hands were rough from scrubbing floors, her back constantly ached, and despite all her hard work, she remained almost invisible. That was the life of a Victorian maid. The wealthy family upstairs rarely noticed the people who kept their world running. Servants were expected to work silently. They entered through separate doors, used separate staircases, ate separate meals, and lived separate lives. To the aristocracy, servants were almost part of the furniture. Eleanor knew this better than anyone. She had been born in a small village nearby. Her father had died in a mining accident when she was 10. 2 years later, her mother became ill. Money disappeared quickly. Food became scarce. By 14, Eleanor had no choice but to find work. Ashmore Hall offered employment. The wages were small. The hours were brutal. But it was better than starvation. For years she accepted her fate, until the day everything changed. It happened on a cold October afternoon. Eleanor had been sent to clean one of the unused guest rooms. The room overlooked the estate gardens. As she dusted the shelves, she heard footsteps behind her. She immediately stepped aside. Servants were trained never to block a gentleman's path. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. The man standing in the doorway smiled. He looked younger than most visitors, perhaps 30 years old. Tall, well-dressed dark hair, confident eyes. This was Charles Whitmore, a wealthy businessman from London, and a close friend of Lord Ashmore. Charles studied her for a moment. "You don't need to apologize." Eleanor lowered her gaze. Servants rarely made eye contact with guests. "It's my fault," Charles continued. "I didn't realize someone was working here." His voice sounded surprisingly kind. Most wealthy men barely acknowledged servants, yet Charles spoke as though she were a normal person. That alone caught her attention. He smiled again. "What is your name?" "Eleanor, sir. A beautiful name." Her cheeks warmed slightly. No gentleman had ever spoken to her that way before. Charles eventually left. The encounter lasted less than a minute, yet Eleanor found herself thinking about it for the rest of the day. She told herself it meant nothing. Just a brief conversation, nothing more. But she was wrong, because Charles noticed her too. Over the next several days he seemed to appear everywhere. In the library, near the gardens, along the hallways. Each time he greeted her politely. Each time he spoke a little longer. And each time Eleanor felt her defenses weaken. One evening she was arranging flowers in the drawing room when Charles entered. The room was empty. No family members were present. No other servants, only the two of them. Charles approached slowly. "You work harder than anyone in this house." Eleanor laughed softly. "That's what maids are paid to do." "No," Charles replied. "Most people would complain." She looked surprised. "No one cares if servants complain." "I care." Those two words changed everything. For years, Eleanor had felt invisible, forgotten, unimportant. Now someone important seemed to see her, to notice her, to value her. Charles continued speaking, asking about her family. Her childhood, her dreams. No gentleman had ever shown such interest. It felt wonderful, dangerous, and completely unexpected. Weeks passed. Their conversations became more frequent, longer. More personal, Eleanor knew she should be careful. Victorian society had strict rules. A servant and a gentleman lived in entirely different worlds. Relationships between them rarely ended well. Yet Charles seemed different. He listened. He remembered details. He treated her with kindness. Slowly, Eleanor began trusting him. She shared things she had never told anyone. Her fears, her loneliness, her hopes for the future. Charles listened attentively. Sometimes he even seemed genuinely moved. One snowy evening he handed her a small book. Eleanor stared at it in shock. A gift. No one had ever given her a gift before. "You mentioned wanting to read more," Charles said. "So I brought this." Tears nearly filled her eyes. The book wasn't expensive, but its meaning was enormous. Someone had remembered. Someone had cared. Someone had listened. That night, Eleanor lay awake for hours. For the first time in years, she imagined a different future, a happier future. She didn't realize that hope would eventually become the source of her greatest pain. Winter settled heavily over Yorkshire. Snow covered the gardens of Ashmore Hall. The trees stood bare against the grey sky, and while the wealthy family enjoyed warm fires and lavish dinners upstairs, the servants continued their endless work below stairs. For Eleanor Finch, however, something had changed. For the first time in years, she felt happy. Every day she looked forward to seeing Charles Whitmore. What began as brief conversations had become something much deeper. Whenever Charles visited Ashmore Hall, he found excuses to speak with her. Sometimes it was only a few minutes. Other times they talked for nearly an hour. Always in secret, always away from watchful eyes. Victorian society was unforgiving. A gentleman speaking privately with a maid could destroy reputations. If Lord Ashmore discovered what was happening, Eleanor would almost certainly lose her position. Yet despite the risks, neither of them stopped. One evening, Eleanor was polishing silver in the servants' hall when a young footman approached. "Someone left this for you." He handed her a folded note. Her heart immediately began racing. The handwriting was familiar. "Charles." She waited until she was alone before opening it. Inside was a short message. "Meet me in the greenhouse after sunset." Her hands trembled. She knew she should refuse. She knew she should burn the note. But she didn't that evening. After completing her duties, she quietly slipped away. The greenhouse stood at the far edge of the estate, high among tall hedges. Few people visited it during winter. Charles was already waiting. Warm lantern light illuminated his face. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt strangely. Then "You came." Eleanor looked down. "I probably shouldn't have." "No." He stepped closer. "I'm glad you did." For the next hour they talked, not about work, not about servants, not about social class. They talked about dreams, about places they wished to see, about the lives they wished they had. Charles described London, its theatres, its crowded streets, its endless opportunities. Eleanor listened with fascination. To her, London seemed like another world, a world far beyond the narrow boundaries of servant life. Eventually, Charles grew quiet. Then he asked a question. "If you could leave all of this behind, would you?" Eleanor looked around the greenhouse. The cold glass, the fading flowers, the darkness outside. Then she thought about endless laundry, endless cleaning, endless orders. "Yes," she admitted softly. Charles smiled. "So would I." The answer surprised her. "You?" He laughed. "You think wealthy men are automatically happy?" She didn't know what to say. Charles looked away. "My life isn't what people imagine." For the first time he seemed vulnerable, human. Not a wealthy gentleman, just a lonely man. And that made Eleanor trust him even more. Over the following weeks, their meetings continued. The greenhouse became their secret place, a place where class differences seemed to disappear, a place where they could pretend they belonged to the same world. Eleanor knew she was falling in love. The realization terrified her, because love between people of different classes almost never ended happily. She had heard countless stories. Servant girls abandoned, promises broken, lives ruined. Yet Charles seemed different. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't like the men in those stories. At least that was what she believed. One night, Charles brought another gift, a silver locket. Still but beautiful. Eleanor stared at it in disbelief. I can't accept this. Why not? It's too expensive. Charles gently placed it in her hand. It belongs to you. The locket felt warm against her skin. No one had ever given her something so precious. No one had ever made her feel so important. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you. Charles smiled. Then he carefully brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture lasted only a second, yet it changed everything. Neither moved away, neither spoke. The distance between them vanished. And for the first time, Charles kissed her. Eleanor's heart felt as though it might stop. The world disappeared. The greenhouse disappeared. The mansion disappeared. For a brief moment there was only him. When the kiss ended, she could barely breathe. Charles looked into her eyes. I care about you. 3 simple words. 3 words she had longed to hear. 3 words that made her believe the impossible. From that night forward, their relationship deepened. Secret meetings became routine. Conversations became confessions. They exchanged letters, short dreams, imagined futures. Charles spoke often about change, about escaping expectations, about creating a life together. And slowly, Eleanor began believing those dreams could become reality. One evening, she finally asked the question that had haunted her. What are we doing? Charles seemed confused. What do you mean? This. She looked at him. For a moment he said nothing, then he took her hands. Eleanor. His voice sounded sincere, genuine. I love you. The words struck her like lightning. No man had ever said them before. No one had ever looked at her the way Charles did. Tears formed instantly. You do? Of course I do. He squeezed her hands. I've never met anyone like you. Her heart completely surrendered. Every fear vanished. Every warning disappeared. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to imagine happiness, marriage, a home, children, a future beyond service. Charles seemed to sense her thoughts. And then he made a promise. A promise that would change everything. I want us to be together. Eleanor smiled through tears. We can't. You know why? Victorian society wasn't kind to relationships like theirs. A wealthy gentleman marrying a maid would cause scandal, ridicule, outrage. Charles leaned closer. I don't care what society thinks. Her heart pounded. I care about you. The words sounded perfect, too perfect, but Eleanor didn't notice. She wanted to believe, needed to believe. Then came the promise. The promise she would remember for the rest of her life. When the time is right, Charles said softly, I will marry you. The world seemed to stop. Marry her, a gentleman, a wealthy man. Promising marriage. It felt impossible. Yet Charles looked completely sincere. Eleanor began crying openly. Years of loneliness, years of hardship, years of feeling invisible. Suddenly, they all seemed worth enduring, because now she had hope. Real hope. Charles wrapped his arms around her, and as she cried against his shoulder, she failed to notice something. For a brief moment, just a brief moment, his expression changed. A flicker of uncertainty, a flicker of guilt, a flicker of something hidden, then it disappeared, and Eleanor never saw it, because she trusted him completely. Unfortunately, trust can be the most dangerous gift a person gives, especially when it's placed in the wrong hands. Spring arrived slowly at Ashmore Hall. The snow melted, the gardens awakened, birdsong returned to the estate, and for Eleanor Finch, life had never seemed brighter. Every morning she woke with hope. Every night she fell asleep, imagining the future Charles Whitmore had promised. A future where she would no longer be a servant, a future where she would belong to someone who loved her, a future where all her suffering would finally mean something. She carried the silver locket everywhere, hid beneath her uniform, close to her heart. Whenever work became difficult, she touched it. Whenever she felt exhausted, she remembered Charles's promise. "When the time is right, I will marry you." Those words became her strength, her comfort, her greatest dream, and unfortunately, her greatest weakness. For several months, everything seemed perfect. Charles continued visiting Ashmore Hall. Their secret meetings continued. Their letters became longer, more personal, more romantic. Charles often wrote about their future: a small home, a peaceful life, freedom from expectations, freedom from social rules, freedom from the world that kept them apart. Eleanor believed every word. Why wouldn't she? Charles had never given her a reason to doubt him, at least not yet. One afternoon, Eleanor was helping prepare guest rooms. Several important visitors were expected. The entire household was busy. As she carried fresh linens upstairs, she overheard two maids whispering, "Have you heard about Mr. Whitmore?" Eleanor immediately slowed her pace. "Which story?" "The one from London." The other maid laughed. "I've heard dozens." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Dozens? What did that mean? She wanted to keep listening, but another servant appeared. The conversation ended instantly. For the rest of the day, curiosity bothered her. That evening she met Charles in the greenhouse. After talking for a while, she casually asked, "Do people often gossip about you in London?" Charles laughed. "Constantly." "Why?" "Wealth attracts gossip." The answer seemed reasonable, yet something about it felt incomplete. For the first time, a tiny doubt appeared in her mind, only a tiny one, but it was there. A few weeks later, another strange thing happened. Charles had promised to meet her. Eleanor waited in the greenhouse. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. He never came. She returned to her room disappointed. The next day, Charles finally appeared. "I'm sorry, you didn't come. I had business in York." His explanation sounded believable. Yet something felt wrong. He looked nervous, distracted, almost guilty. Eleanor noticed it immediately, but she pushed the feeling away. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone misses appointments. That was what she told herself. The months passed, summer approached, and Charles began disappearing more often. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes for nearly a month. Whenever he returned, he always had an explanation: business, travel, family matters, important meetings. The reasons varied, yet the pattern remained, and Eleanor started feeling something unfamiliar: fear. Not fear of Charles, fear of losing him, because every absence reminded her of something. Their worlds were different. He was wealthy, powerful, free. She was a servant, dependent, replaceable. The imbalance terrified her. One evening she finally spoke honestly. "What if you stop coming?" Charles looked surprised. "What? What if one day you decide this isn't worth it anymore?" His expression softened. "Eleanor," he took her hand. "I could never do that. Promise. I promise." She smiled. But the fear didn't disappear, because promises are easy. Keeping them is difficult. That summer, Lord Ashmore hosted a grand celebration. Guests arrived from across England: politicians, businessmen, wealthy families, Members of high society, the mansion became crowded. Servants worked almost constantly. For Eleanor, it was exhausting, yet she remained excited. Charles would be attending. She hadn't seen him in nearly 3 weeks. The evening finally arrived. The ballroom glittered with candlelight. Music echoed through the mansion. Elegant women danced in expensive gowns. Gentlemen laughed over glasses of wine. Meanwhile, servants moved silently through the crowd, invisible as always. Eleanor was carrying a tray when she saw Charles. Her heart instantly lifted. Then everything changed, because Charles wasn't alone. A beautiful young woman stood beside him. She wore an expensive blue dress. Jewels sparkled around her neck. Several guests seemed eager to speak with her. Clearly, she belonged to their world, not Eleanor's. Charles smiled as he talked with her. The woman laughed. Then she placed her hand gently on his arm. The sight felt like a knife. Eleanor looked away immediately. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was she? Why was she with Charles? Why had he never mentioned her? Later that night, Eleanor overheard something. Two guests stood nearby discussing the woman. Miss Beaumont is lovely. Indeed, I hear the engagement may be announced soon. Eleanor froze. Engagement? Her pulse quickened. The second guest nodded. Whitmore would be fortunate to marry her. The tray nearly slipped from Eleanor's hands. Whitmore, Charles Whitmore. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Surely she had misunderstood. Surely there was another Whitmore. There had to be. Yet deep inside, a terrible feeling began growing. She spent the rest of the evening in shock. Unable to focus, unable to think, unable to breathe properly. When her duties finally ended, she rushed toward the greenhouse. Charles arrived shortly afterward. The moment he entered, she confronted him. Who is Miss Beaumont? His expression changed instantly, only for a second. But Eleanor saw it, and that frightened her more than anything. Where did you hear that name? People were talking. Charles sighed, then looked away. A terrible silence followed. For the first time since meeting him, Charles seemed unsure, uncomfortable, trapped. Eleanor's heart pounded. Charles? He remained silent. Answer me. Finally he spoke. Her family and mine have known each other for years. That's not what I asked. Another silence. Longer this time, much longer. Then came the answer. People expect us to marry. The words struck her like lightning. For several seconds she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even think. What do you mean? It doesn't mean anything. His voice sounded rushed, defensive. It means exactly what it sounds like. No, he stepped forward. Eleanor, listen to me. But now fear was growing inside her. Real fear, the kind that cannot be ignored. Are you engaged? No, the answer came quickly, too quickly, yet something still felt wrong, painfully wrong. Then why are people saying it? Charles ran a hand through his hair. Because society enjoys creating stories. His explanation sounded reasonable, yet Eleanor no longer felt reassured. Not completely, not like before, because for the first time, she had seen uncertainty in his eyes. And once doubt enters a relationship, it rarely leaves quietly. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling until dawn. Questions raced through her mind. Who exactly was Miss Beaumont? Why had Charles never mentioned her? Why did he look frightened when she asked? Why did his answers feel incomplete? The next morning she forced herself to work, but her heart felt heavier than ever. For months she had believed their future was secure. Now she wasn't sure. For the first time, the beautiful dream Charles had built was beginning to crack, and hidden behind those cracks, a far darker truth was waiting to emerge. The days after the ballroom celebration felt different. Not because Ashmore Hall had changed. Not because the servants had changed. Not because Charles had changed. At least not visibly. The difference was Eleanor. For the first time since falling in love, she had begun questioning the man she trusted more than anyone. And once doubt enters the heart, every detail suddenly seems suspicious. Every absence, every excuse, every unanswered question, every silence. The things she once ignored now demanded attention. The things she once accepted now felt impossible to overlook, and the deeper she looked, the more uncomfortable the truth became. For nearly a week, Charles did not visit. No letters arrived. No messages appeared. No secret meetings were arranged. Nothing. The silence felt unbearable. Eleanor tried convincing herself there was a reasonable explanation. Business, travel, family obligations, something, anything, yet her instincts refused to settle. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and for the first time, she considered doing something she never thought possible. Finding answers herself. One afternoon, while cleaning one of the guest rooms, Eleanor overheard a conversation. Two visiting gentlemen stood outside the door. Neither realized she was inside. The Beaumont family expects an announcement soon. The other laughed. I've heard Whitmore has delayed it again. Only because he's stubborn. Perhaps. The first man lowered his voice, but eventually he'll do what's expected. Their footsteps faded, the conversation ended, but Eleanor stood frozen. The Beaumont family, again, the same name, the same rumors, the same fear. And suddenly she realized something. If everyone believed Charles would marry Miss Beaumont, then why was he promising marriage to her? The question haunted her all day and all night. Several days later, Charles finally returned. Eleanor met him in the greenhouse. The moment she saw him, her heart wanted to forget everything, wanted to believe again, wanted to trust him, but she forced herself to remain calm. You disappeared. Charles smiled weakly. I know. No letters. I was busy. No messages. I couldn't. The answers felt rehearsed, prepared like someone repeating lines from a script. Eleanor stared at him. Are you hiding something from me? For a brief second his face changed. Only a second. But she noticed then the smile returned. No. The answer came too quickly, much too quickly. And for the first time, she didn't believe him. That night, Eleanor cried herself to sleep, not because she knew the truth, because she didn't. The uncertainty was worse. Much worse. At least the truth could be faced. The unknown could not. Weeks passed. Summer deepened. And Ashmore Hall prepared for another season of wealthy visitors. One morning the housekeeper assigned Eleanor to clean several private rooms, including one rarely used by guests, a room currently occupied by Charles Whitmore. Normally servants were instructed not to examine personal belongings. Clean, dust, leave. That was the rule, and Eleanor intended to follow it at first. The room was empty when she entered. Sunlight spilled across the floor. A travel trunk stood near the bed. Several coats hung beside the wardrobe. Everything appeared ordinary, until she noticed an envelope. It rested partially beneath a stack of papers. Nothing unusual about that, except for one detail, the handwriting. A woman's handwriting, elegant, careful. Personal. Eleanor immediately looked away. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't look. She shouldn't even notice. Yet her eyes kept returning. Again, and again, and again. Finally she stepped closer. Her hands trembled. One glance, just one. That was all. The envelope contained a letter, a short one. Only a few paragraphs, but the words changed everything. My dear Charles. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She continued reading. Father keeps asking when our engagement will be formally announced. Everyone, already assumes it will happen. Her vision blurred. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder, harder to breathe inside. She forced herself to continue. I hope your next visit to London settles the matter once and for all. The letter ended with a name, Victoria Beaumont. Eleanor dropped the paper. For several seconds, she simply stared at it, unable to think, unable to move, unable to understand. The rumors were true, not entirely perhaps, but true enough. Victoria Beaumont clearly believed marriage was expected. Expected by her family, expected by society, expected by everyone. And Charles had never mentioned any of it, never. Not once. Not even when Eleanor directly asked. A sound echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Someone approaching, panicking. Eleanor replaced the letter exactly where she found it, then rushed back to her cleaning. Moments later, another servant entered. The opportunity vanished. But the damage had already been done. Because now Eleanor knew something. Charles was hiding far more than he admitted. That evening she waited in the greenhouse. Rain struck the glass roof. Thunder rolled across the countryside. The weather matched her mood perfectly, dark, uncertain, dangerous. When Charles arrived, she immediately confronted him. I know about Victoria. His smile disappeared instantly. What? I found her letter. Silence. A terrible silence. The kind that says more than words ever could. You read my private correspondence. His tone shocked her, not because he sounded angry. Because he sounded afraid, very afraid. You lied to me, Eleanor. You lied. His shoulders tightened. I was going to explain when. No answer. When, Charles? Still nothing. The rain grew heavier outside. Thunder shook the greenhouse, yet neither noticed. Both were trapped inside a far more dangerous storm. Finally, Charles spoke. There was an understanding. What does that mean? Our families hoped we would marry. Hoped? Yes. Eleanor stared at him. The explanation felt incomplete. Agan always incomplete. Every answer led to more questions, never fewer. Do you love her? No. The answer came instantly, without hesitation. And strangely, that answer felt genuine. For the first time all evening, yet it changed nothing because another question remained, a far more important one. Then why does she believe you're going to marry her? Charles looked away, and that silence frightened Eleanor more than any answer could. For nearly a minute, neither spoke. Then Charles finally whispered something. Something that shattered the illusion she had protected for months. I don't know how to stop it. The words hung in the air, heavy, painful, terrifying. Because they revealed something unexpected. Charles wasn't controlling the situation. He was trapped inside it. And trapped people often make desperate decisions. What have you told her? Eleanor asked. No answer. What have you promised her? Charles remained silent, and suddenly Eleanor understood, not completely, but enough to feel her heart breaking. Because promises were being made everywhere. To Victoria, to society, to his family, and to her. Yet all those promises couldn't possibly be true. Someone would eventually be hurt. Someone would eventually be betrayed. The only question was who. That night, Eleanor walked back to the servants' quarters alone. For the first time in months, she removed the silver locket and stared at it. The gift once felt magical. Now it felt different, heavier somehow. Less certain, like everything else. Far away, in his room, Charles sat alone. A bottle of whiskey untouched beside him. Victoria's letter lay open on the desk. Several others beside it. Letters from family, business partners, friends, people demanding decisions. Demanding commitments. Demanding answers. And for the first time, Charles looked genuinely frightened. Not because Eleanor had discovered the letter, because she was getting closer to the truth. A truth he had hidden from everyone, even himself. And buried beneath all the lies was one final secret, a secret so devastating that if Eleanor discovered it, everything would collapse. Their relationship, his reputation, his future, everything. And unfortunately for Charles, that secret was already moving toward the surface. Autumn arrived early that year. Cold winds swept across the Yorkshire countryside. The gardens of Ashmore Hall began losing their colour. Leaves drifted from ancient trees. The days grew shorter. And inside Eleanor Finch, something else was fading. Hope, the hope she had protected for nearly a year. The hope she had built around Charles Whitmore. The hope that had carried her through endless days of work and loneliness. After discovering Victoria Beaumont's letters, Eleanor could no longer ignore reality. Something was terribly wrong. Charles was hiding far more than he admitted. The question was no longer whether he was lying. The question was how much. For nearly 2 weeks after their confrontation, Charles avoided her. No greenhouse meetings, no secret letters, no stolen moments together. Nothing. The silence felt deliberate, painful, cruel. Every morning Eleanor woke expecting a message. Every evening she waited, and every evening disappointment arrived instead. The uncertainty slowly became torture. Her appetite disappeared. Sleep became impossible. Even the other servants noticed. "You look exhausted," one maid remarked. Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Not even close. Then one rainy afternoon everything changed. A new servant arrived from London. His name was Thomas. A young footman recently employed by Lord Ashmore. Most servants ignored him. Eleanor barely noticed him herself, until the evening he approached her privately. "I need to ask you something." His expression seemed uneasy, concerned, almost nervous. "What is it?" Thomas hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Do you know Mr. Charles Whitmore?" The question immediately alarmed her. "Why?" Thomas looked around to ensure nobody was listening, then lowered his voice. "Because people in London talk about him." Eleanor's heart tightened. "What kind of things?" The footman swallowed hard. "Things you deserve to know." The next few minutes changed Eleanor's life forever. According to Thomas, Charles Whitmore's name had become the subject of frequent gossip among wealthy circles in London. Not because of business, not because of politics, because of women, several women, rumors, broken engagements, promises that mysteriously disappeared, relationships that ended badly, stories that wealthy families quietly buried, stories ordinary people rarely heard. At first Eleanor refused to believe it. No, not Charles, not the man she loved, not the man who promised marriage, not the man who made her feel seen. Yet Thomas continued, and every word felt like another crack spreading through her heart. That night, Eleanor sat alone in the servants' quarters, unable to think clearly, unable to stop remembering every conversation, every promise, every excuse, every absence. For the first time she viewed them differently, not as signs of love, but as warning signs she had ignored. Warning signs she hadn't wanted to see, because love often blinds people to the truth, especially when the truth is painful. 3 days later, Charles finally appeared. A note arrived. "The greenhouse, tonight." The sight of his handwriting still made her heart race. But now another feeling accompanied it: fear. Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling as they faced each other once again. Charles looked exhausted, his face pale, his eyes troubled, almost haunted. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally Eleanor broke the silence. "Tell me the truth." Charles looked down. "Eleanor, no more lies." Her voice trembled. "No more excuses." Another silence followed, long, heavy, unavoidable. Then Charles finally spoke, and the truth began emerging.
My family arranged my future years ago.
Eleanor listened silently. Victoria Beaumont was always part of that future. The words hit hard, but she forced herself to remain calm. I asked if you were engaged. I wasn't officially engaged. That's not an answer. Charles closed his eyes.
No, it wasn't.
For the next hour, the story unfolded. His family expected him to marry Victoria. Business interests depended on it. Family alliances depended on it. Money depended on it. Reputation depended on it. His entire social position depended on it. For years he had resisted, denied, avoided, postponed. But eventually the pressure became impossible to escape. And throughout all of it, he continued seeing Eleanor, continued making promises, continued building dreams. Dreams he increasingly knew might never come true. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. When were you going to tell me? Charles said nothing. That silence was answer enough. The pain growing inside her became unbearable. You promised to marry me. His face twisted with guilt. I know, you said you loved me. I do. Then why? Her voice cracked. Why would you do this? Charles looked completely broken. Yet his answer shattered her heart, because it revealed the terrible truth. The truth she had refused to see. I wanted both worlds. The confession hung in the air, cold, merciless, honest. For the first time. Truly honest. Charles loved her, perhaps he genuinely did, but he also loved his wealth, his status, his position, his comfortable life. And when forced to choose, he never actually chose at all. Instead, he kept both as long as possible. Victoria in one world, Eleanor in another. Promises in both, truth in neither. Eleanor felt something inside her collapse. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly. Like a building whose foundation had been weakening for months. Everything she believed, everything she trusted, everything she hoped for, falling apart. Then came the final blow, the secret Charles never intended her to discover. The secret even Victoria Beaumont didn't know. The secret that would soon destroy everything. Charles finally whispered it. There is something else. Eleanor stared at him. Fear returned immediately. What? His face turned pale. I received a letter from London yesterday. The silence became unbearable. What letter? Charles swallowed hard. The engagement announcement has been scheduled. Eleanor felt her breath stop. What? It will be announced publicly next month. The world seemed to freeze. Next month, 30 days. 30 days until the man who promised to marry her would officially belong to someone else. Tears streamed down her face. She could no longer stop them, could no longer hide them, could no longer pretend she was strong. Everything hurt, her chest, her heart, her soul, everything. For the first time since childhood, Eleanor broke down completely, and Charles stood there watching, unable to fix what he had broken, unable to undo months of deception, unable to repair a future already shattered, because some wounds cannot be repaired, some betrayals cannot be erased, some promises cannot survive reality. As Eleanor turned and walked away from the greenhouse, Charles called after her. Eleanor. She stopped, but did not turn around. His voice trembled. I'm sorry. The words echoed through the darkness. Words she once desperately wanted to hear. Words that now meant nothing, absolutely nothing. Without looking back, Eleanor whispered, You should have been sorry before you made the promise. Then she disappeared into the rain, leaving Charles completely alone. But neither of them knew something important. The scandal was only beginning, because Victoria Beaumont was about to learn the truth. Lord Ashmore was about to learn the truth. And when the truth finally reached society, The consequences would be far worse than either of them imagined. The rain continued long after Eleanor left the greenhouse. Cold water soaked her uniform. Wind whipped through the estate grounds. Yet she barely noticed. The pain inside her was far greater than anything the weather could inflict. For months she had imagined a future, a home, a husband, a family, a life beyond service. Now all of it was gone. Not because fate had been cruel, not because society had been unfair, because the man she trusted had chosen a lie over the truth. And deep down, Eleanor knew something important. The Charles she loved might never have truly existed. Perhaps he was only the version of himself he wanted her to see. The following weeks were among the hardest of her life. She avoided the greenhouse, ignored Charles's letters, refused every request to meet. At first, Charles continued trying. Notes appeared. Miss arrived. Apologies filled page after page. But Eleanor never responded, not once. Every letter remained unopened. Every promise remained unread. Because she finally understood something. The problem wasn't that Charles had lied once. The problem was that his entire relationship with her had been built on half-truths. And half-truths are often more dangerous than lies. Meanwhile, events in London continued moving forward. The engagement announcement approached. Preparations began. Families celebrated. Guests received invitations. Newspapers started whispering about the union between Charles Whitmore and Victoria Beaumont. To society, it appeared perfect. A wealthy gentleman, a respected family, a promising future. No one knew about the maid in Yorkshire. No one knew about the promises made beneath the greenhouse roof. No one knew about Eleanor, at least not yet. Victoria Beaumont learned the truth entirely by accident. A week before the public announcement, she discovered something hidden among Charles's personal papers. Several letters. Letters written by Eleanor. Letters Charles had kept. Every word revealed affection, hope, trust, love. Victoria read them in disbelief, then anger, then heartbreak. Because she finally realized something. She had not been the only woman deceived. The following evening, Charles arrived at the Beaumont residence, expecting another family dinner. Instead, he walked directly into a confrontation. Victoria stood waiting. The letters lay on the table between them. Charles immediately recognized them, and his face turned white. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Victoria spoke. "Who is Eleanor Finch?" Charles had no answer, at least none that mattered. The argument lasted hours. Voices echoed through the house. Accusations filled the air. Questions demanded answers, and wedges created more questions. By midnight, the truth had emerged. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to destroy trust completely. Enough to destroy the engagement. Enough to create a scandal. Within days, the story spread, first through wealthy circles, then through London society. Then beyond, rumors traveled quickly, especially when powerful families were involved. People talked, speculated, exaggerated, judged. Some blamed Charles, some blamed Eleanor, some blamed Victoria. Most simply enjoyed the gossip, because society often treats other people's suffering as entertainment. The engagement was cancelled, publicly, humiliatingly. The Beaumont family withdrew completely. Business relationships suffered. Friends disappeared. Invitations stopped arriving. People who once admired Charles suddenly avoided him. The consequences arrived faster than he expected, and they hit harder than he imagined. 1 month later, Charles returned to Ashmore Hall, not as a confident gentleman, not as a man admired by society, but as someone who had lost nearly everything: his reputation, his future marriage, his standing among many of his peers, and perhaps most painful of all, the woman he truly loved. He asked to see Eleanor. She refused. He asked again. She refused again. A third request followed. Finally, after much hesitation, she agreed. One meeting, one conversation, one ending. Nothing more. The meeting took place in the gardens, not the greenhouse. Never the greenhouse. That place belonged to the past now. The memories hurt too much. Charles looked different, older somehow, tired, defeated. For several moments he neither spoke. The autumn wind moved through the trees. Dead leaves drifted across the ground. Then Charles finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry." The same words, the same apology. But now they sounded genuine, painfully genuine. Because for the first time, he understood the cost of his choices. Eleanor looked at him quietly. Months earlier, she would have forgiven him instantly. Months earlier, she would have believed anything he said. But that version of Eleanor no longer existed. The experience had changed her, strengthened her, forced her to see reality. "I know you're sorry." Charles lowered his eyes. "Then please," his voice cracked, "give me another chance." For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. She simply studied the man standing before her, the man she once planned to spend her life with, the man who had broken her heart, the man who now looked completely lost. And strangely, she no longer hated him, because hatred requires emotional attachment, and much of that attachment had finally disappeared. When she spoke, her voice remained calm. "You think the problem is Victoria?" Charles frowned. "What? You think the problem is society?" "No. You think the problem is your family?" "Eleanor, no." She shook her head. "The problem was you." The words struck harder than any insult, because they were true, painfully true. You wanted everyone to be happy. Tears filled Charles's eyes. You wanted your family happy. Silence. You wanted Victoria happy. More silence. You wanted me happy. His shoulders sagged, completely defeated. And in the end, Eleanor continued softly, "You hurt everyone." The truth hung between them. Unavoidable. Final. Charles looked at her one last time. "Do you still love me?" The question lingered in the cold air. Eleanor thought carefully, because once, the answer would have been simple. Now it wasn't. Finally, she replied, "A part of me probably always will." Hope flashed across his face. Then she continued, "But I could never trust you again." The hope vanished immediately, and both understood the story was over. Charles left Ashmore Hall the following morning. No dramatic farewell, no final kiss, no miracle ending, just silence and regret, a great deal of regret. As for Eleanor, life remained difficult. She remained a servant for several more years, but something had changed. She no longer measured her worth through someone else's promises. She no longer waited for someone to rescue her. She no longer believed happiness depended upon another person. For the first time in her life, she believed in herself. Several years later, Eleanor left service entirely. She accepted a position at a small school, a quieter life, a simpler life, a life she built herself. And although the memory of Charles never disappeared completely, it no longer controlled her. It became a lesson instead, a painful lesson, but a valuable one. And somewhere in London, Charles Whitmore spent the rest of his life remembering a young maid named Eleanor Finch. Not because she was the woman he almost married, but because she was the woman who showed him the cost of dishonesty, the woman he truly loved, and the woman he lost forever.